Tall Cedar and the Cowboy, a true Arizona tale. The gunshot echoed across the canyon before Jake Miller even saw the rider. His horse reared up, nearly throwing him off the saddle as another bullet whizzed past his ear. He didn't have time to think, only react. His hand went to his revolver as he kicked his horse into a full gallop toward the rocks ahead. The Apache warrior called Tall Cedar had been tracking Jake for 3 days now, not because of hatred or war, but because Jake had something that didn't belong to him. A medicine pouch taken from a sacred site 2 weeks ago by a group of drifters Jake had been riding with. The others were dead now, killed in a saloon fight in Tucson. Jake was the last one left, and he had the pouch. Jake didn't know what was in it. He'd never opened it, but he knew it was valuable enough for someone to want him dead. He dove behind a boulder just as another shot rang out. His horse kept running, disappearing into the desert brush. Now he was on foot in Apache territory with half a canteen of water and 6 bullets. Tall Cedar appeared on the ridge above, his rifle aimed steady at Jake's position. But he didn't fire. Instead, he called out in broken English, "You have what is mine. Give it back, you live." Jake's heart hammered in his chest. He'd heard stories about Tall Cedar. The man was a legend among both settlers and natives. 7 feet tall, or so they said. Could track a man across solid rock, never missed a shot, and never showed mercy to thieves. "I didn't take nothing from nobody," Jake shouted back, lying through his teeth. The pouch felt like it weighed 100 pounds in his jacket pocket. "You lie, cowboy. I saw you in Tucson. You were with the men who robbed the canyon shrine. They are dead. You are not. Yet." Jake wiped sweat from his forehead. The Arizona sun was merciless, and his cover wouldn't last long. He had 2 choices: run and get shot in the back, or face Tall Cedar and probably get shot in the front. Neither option appealed to him. Then he remembered the ravine. About 50 yards to his left, hidden by mesquite trees, was a deep crack in the earth. If he could make it there, he might lose Tall Cedar in the maze of passages below. It was a slim chance, but it was better than waiting to die of thirst or a bullet. He took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, and burst from cover, running as fast as his legs could carry him toward the ravine. The first bullet hit the ground at his feet. The second grazed his shoulder, spinning him sideways but not stopping him. The third never came. Jake crashed through the mesquite branches and threw himself into the ravine, falling 15 feet before hitting the sandy bottom hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. Jake pushed himself to his feet and started running deeper into the canyon system. His shoulder burned where the bullet had torn through his shirt, leaving a bloody streak across his skin. Behind him, he could hear rocks falling as Tall Cedar descended into the ravine. The man moved like a ghost, barely making a sound despite his size. The canyon twisted and turned, growing narrower with each step. Jake's boots splashed through a thin stream of water that ran along the bottom. He tried to stay in the water to hide his tracks, but he knew Tall Cedar would find him anyway. Men like that always did. After 20 minutes of running, Jake found himself in a wider chamber where the canyon opened up into a natural amphitheater. Petroglyphs covered the walls, ancient symbols that seemed to watch him with accusing eyes. In the center of the space stood a flat rock that looked like an altar. This was a sacred place, and Jake suddenly realized he'd made a terrible mistake coming here. "You cannot run from what you have done," Tall Cedar's voice boomed from behind him. Jake spun around, his revolver drawn. Tall Cedar stood at the entrance to the chamber, his rifle lowered but ready. Up close, Jake could see the man was indeed massive, well over 6.5 feet tall with shoulders like a bull. His face was weathered and scarred, but his eyes held an intelligence that made Jake's stomach drop. "I'll give it back," Jake said, his voice shaking. "Just let me go." "You do not understand what you carry," Tall Cedar replied, taking a step forward. "That pouch holds the bones of my grandfather. You and your friends dug up his grave for trinkets you thought were gold. You disturbed his rest. You brought shame upon my family." Jake's hand moved to his pocket. He pulled out the small leather pouch and held it up. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what it was. Ignorance does not erase the crime." "Then kill me and be done with it," Jake said, surprised by his own boldness. "I'm tired of running." Tall Cedar studied him for a long moment. "My grandfather was a wise man. He believed in justice, not revenge. He would want his bones returned with respect, not covered in the blood of a foolish cowboy." Jake slowly walked forward and placed the pouch on the altar rock. "I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I'm sorry." Tall Cedar lowered his rifle completely. "You will help me return these bones to their proper place. Then you will leave Arizona and never come back. If I see your face again, no apology will save you." Jake nodded, relief flooding through him. "Yes, sir. Whatever you need. We have 3 days' journey ahead." The burial site is in the mountains to the north. Can you ride? My horse ran off. Then you walk. And Cowboy, if you try to run again, I will not miss next time. They left the canyon as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Tall Cedar moved with purpose, following paths only he could see. Jake struggled to keep up, his wounded shoulder throbbing with each step. He wondered if he'd made the right choice trusting this man, but what other option did he have? As darkness fell, they made camp in a small hollow protected from the wind. Tall Cedar built a fire without speaking and cooked strips of dried meat over the flames. He offered some to Jake, who accepted gratefully. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the distant howl of coyotes. "Why didn't you kill me back there?" Jake finally asked. Tall Cedar poked at the fire with a stick. "Because you reminded me of myself when I was young." "Stupid. Following the wrong men? Making bad choices? You were a cowboy?" "I was many things before I became what I am now. I lived in your world for a time, learned your language, worked on ranches, even wore your clothes and tried to be like you." He looked up at Jake with hard eyes. "But your people would not accept me. They saw only an Apache, not a man. So I returned to my people and remembered who I was." Jake didn't know what to say to that. He'd never thought much about the Apache as real people with real lives. To him, they'd always been just stories, threats in the night, obstacles to progress. Looking at Tall Cedar now, he felt ashamed of his ignorance. "How far to the burial grounds?" Jake asked, changing the subject. 2 more days if we move fast. 3 if you slow me down." "I won't slow you down." Tall Cedar smiled, a thin expression that didn't reach his eyes. "We will see, Cowboy." "We will see." They took turns sleeping, with Tall Cedar keeping first watch. Jake lay on the hard ground, using his saddlebags as a pillow, and stared up at the stars. He thought about the choices that had brought him here, the men he'd ridden with, the things he'd done for money. None of it seemed worth it now. None of it mattered when you were staring death in the face. When dawn broke, they were already moving. The landscape changed as they traveled north, becoming more rugged and mountainous. They followed game trails that wound through stands of juniper and pine. Jake's legs ached, and his shoulder had stiffened overnight, but he pushed through the pain. He wouldn't give Tall Cedar a reason to regret sparing his life. Around midday, they came across a small stream. Tall Cedar signaled for them to stop and refill their canteens. While Jake drank greedily from the cool water, Tall Cedar scanned the surrounding area with the practiced eye of a hunter. "We are being followed," he said quietly. Jake choked on his water. "What? By who?" "3 men. Maybe 4. They have been tracking us since yesterday." "How do you know?" Tall Cedar pointed to a distant ridge. "Dust cloud." "Too big for animals, and the birds are disturbed." He turned to Jake with a suspicious look. "Did you tell anyone about the pouch?" "No, I swear." "Nobody knew I had it except—" Jake's voice trailed off as he remembered. "There was a bartender in Tucson. He saw me counting my money. Saw me pull out the pouch by accident. But I didn't think nothing of it. You think wrong too often, Cowboy. Those men want what we carry. They think it has value. What do we do?" Tall Cedar checked his rifle and the ammunition belt across his chest.
"We set a trap. Come."
They moved quickly up the stream bed, using the water to hide their tracks. After a 1/4 mile, Tall Cedar led them up a steep embankment to a cluster of boulders that overlooked the stream. It was a perfect ambush position. "You can shoot?" Tall Cedar asked. Jake pulled his revolver. "Well enough. Then you will need to shoot very well today."
"Those men will not ask questions. They will kill us and take the pouch."
They waited in silence behind the rocks. Minutes felt like hours. Jake's heart pounded so hard he thought Tall Cedar could hear it. Then he saw them. 4 riders coming up the stream bed, moving cautiously with weapons drawn. Jake recognized one of them, Pete Lawson, a notorious outlaw who'd been running guns to Mexico. The other 3 were hard-looking men with the eyes of killers. These weren't treasure hunters or curious prospectors. They were professionals, on my signal, Tall Cedar whispered. The riders came closer, spreading out as they searched for tracks. Pete Lawson was in the lead, his hand resting on his pistol. When they were directly below the boulder position, Tall Cedar stood up and fired. The shot caught Pete in the chest, knocking him from his saddle. The other 3 scattered, returning fire as they sought cover. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks around Jake's head. He fired twice, missing both times as his hands shook from adrenaline. Tall Cedar worked his rifle with mechanical precision, firing and reloading with inhuman speed. Another outlaw went down, clutching his leg and screaming. The remaining two abandoned their wounded companion and charged up the embankment on foot, firing as they ran. Jake aimed carefully this time and squeezed the trigger. His bullet hit one of the charging men in the shoulder, spinning him around. Tall Cedar finished him with a shot to the chest. The last outlaw made it to the top of the embankment, his gun aimed at Jake's face. Time seemed to slow down. Jake saw the man's finger tighten on the trigger. He knew he wouldn't be fast enough to dodge or shoot first. This was how he was going to die, killed by a nameless outlaw in the middle of nowhere. Then Tall Cedar's hand shot out, grabbing the outlaw's wrist and twisting. The gun fired, but the bullet went wide. Tall Cedar drove his knife into the man's gut with his other hand, then pushed him off the embankment. The outlaw tumbled down the rocky slope and lay still at the bottom. Jake realized he'd been holding his breath. He let it out in a shaky gasp. "Thank you." Tall Cedar wiped his knife clean on his pants. "Do not thank me yet. Where there are 4, there may be more." They climbed down to check the bodies. Pete Lawson was dead, his eyes staring sightlessly at the sky. 2 others were also gone. The man with the leg wound was still alive, groaning in pain. "Please," he begged when he saw them approach. "Don't kill me. I was just doing a job." "Whose job?" Tall Cedar demanded. "A man in Tucson. Said there was valuable Apache artifacts worth thousands. Said to follow the tall Indian and take whatever he had. This man have a name?" "Carter. Henry Carter. Runs a trading post on the edge of town." Tall Cedar looked at Jake. "You know this man?" Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know him. He tried to buy some of the stuff my friends took from the shrine. We told him to go to hell." He looked down at the wounded outlaw. "Guess he decided to take it anyway." Tall Cedar stood up. "This man Carter will send more hunters. We must move quickly now." "What about him?" Jake pointed to the wounded man. "His friends left him to die. That is his fate." Tall Cedar started walking north again without looking back. Jake hesitated, then followed. Behind them, the wounded outlaw's cries for help gradually faded into the distance. It was a harsh lesson in the cruelty of the desert and the men who inhabited it. They traveled through the afternoon and into the evening, pushing harder than before. Jake's exhaustion was overwhelming, but fear kept him moving. If Henry Carter was behind this, there would definitely be more men coming. Carter had connections throughout Arizona territory, and he didn't give up easily on things he wanted. As night fell, they made camp in a cave hidden behind a waterfall. It was cold and damp, but at least they could have a fire without being seen. Tall Cedar tended to Jake's shoulder wound properly for the first time, cleaning it with water and wrapping it with strips of cloth. "You handled yourself well today," Tall Cedar said as he worked. "Many cowboys would have run or frozen." "I almost froze," Jake admitted. "If you hadn't grabbed that last guy, I'd be dead. But you did not run. That counts for something." They shared more dried meat and some wild berries Tall Cedar had gathered along the way. The food was meager, but Jake was too tired to care. His whole body ached, and his shoulder felt like it was on fire despite the bandage. "Tell me about your grandfather," Jake said after a while. "The one whose bones we're carrying." Tall Cedar stared into the fire, his expression distant. "He was a great warrior and a wise leader. He fought against the soldiers when they came to take our land." "He fought with honor and courage, but in the end, the soldiers were too many. He made peace so that our people could survive. Some called him a traitor. Others called him a hero. He lived to be very old, and when he died, we buried him in the sacred place of our ancestors. And we dug him up for a few gold trinkets. Yes, my family has guarded that place for generations. When I found the grave disturbed, I swore to bring him home no matter what." Jake felt the weight of guilt settle over him again. "I wish I could take it back. I wish I'd never gone there. Wishes change nothing, cowboy. Only actions matter now." They slept in shifts again, with Jake taking the first watch this time. He sat at the cave entrance, listening to the waterfall and watching the darkness beyond. Every shadow looked like a threat, every sound like approaching danger. When Tall Cedar relieved him, Jake fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning brought new challenges. The trail became steeper and more treacherous as they climbed into the high mountains. Snow appeared in patches, and the air grew thin and cold. Jake struggled to keep his footing on the icy rocks, slipping several times and nearly falling. Tall Cedar moved with the sure-footedness of a mountain goat, never seeming to tire or falter. By midday, they reached a narrow pass between 2 towering peaks. Tall Cedar stopped and studied the path ahead carefully. "The burial ground is on the other side of this pass. But this is where they will try to stop us if they are smart. You think they're ahead of us? I know they are. Carter's men know this country. They would have ridden hard through the night to cut us off. So what do? Tall Cedar smiled grimly. We do what they do not expect. We go around. Instead of taking the obvious pass, Tall Cedar led them on a harrowing climb up the mountainside. They used ropes and handholds, inching their way across sheer rock faces. Jake's fear of heights battled with his fear of being shot, and somehow he kept moving. Several times his feet slipped, and only Tall Cedar's quick reflexes saved him from falling to his death. After 3 hours of climbing, they reached a ledge that overlooked the pass below. Tall Cedar had been right. 5 men waited in ambush positions among the rocks, their rifles aimed at the trail. They were so focused on the pass that they never thought to look up. Carter sent his best, Tall Cedar observed. Those are experienced hunters. Can we sneak past them? Yes, but first we make them think we took the pass. Tall Cedar picked up a large rock and threw it with tremendous force. It bounced down the mountainside, clattering and echoing. The men below immediately tensed, their weapons trained on the source of the noise. One of them fired, the shot echoing through the mountains. While they were distracted, Tall Cedar and Jake continued along the ledge, moving away from the pass entirely. They descended on the far side of the mountain, a route so difficult and dangerous that no sane person would attempt it. But Tall Cedar wasn't just any person, and Jake had stopped thinking about sanity miles ago. By the time they reached the valley floor on the other side, the sun was setting. Tall Cedar pointed to a distant mesa, its flat top silhouetted against the orange sky. There, that is where my grandfather rests. They had perhaps an hour of daylight left. They moved as quickly as Jake's exhausted body would allow, crossing open ground that left them exposed. Jake kept expecting to hear gunshots, kept expecting Carter's men to appear from nowhere, but the land remained quiet except for the wind. They reached the base of the mesa just as darkness fell. A narrow trail wound up the steep side, barely wide enough for one person. Tall Cedar started climbing without hesitation, and Jake followed, using his hands and feet to scramble up the rocky path. His wounded shoulder screamed in protest, but he ignored it. At the top, they emerged onto a flat expanse, covered in ancient stones arranged in circles and lines. This was a place of power. Jake could feel it in his bones. Tall Cedar walked to the center of the stone circles, where a gap in the earth marked a disturbed grave. He knelt beside the grave and gently removed the medicine pouch from his jacket. He opened it carefully and poured the contents into his hand. Small bones, carefully wrapped in cloth, gleamed white in the moonlight. Tall Cedar began to chant in his native language, a haunting melody that seemed to merge with the wind. Jake stood back respectfully, feeling like an intruder on this sacred moment. He watched as Tall Cedar placed the bones back into the earth and began covering them with soil and stones. The ceremony lasted well into the night, with Tall Cedar singing and praying over the grave. Finally, Tall Cedar stood and faced Jake. It is done. My grandfather can rest in peace now. I'm glad, Jake said, and he meant it. I'm truly glad. You have kept your word, Cowboy. You are free to go, but remember what I told you. Leave Arizona, start a new life somewhere else. If I see you again, there will be no mercy. Jake nodded. I understand, and I will. I'm done with this life, done with stealing and running. I'm going to find honest work and become a better man. Living them is hard. I know, but I'm going to try. Tall Cedar walked to the edge of the mesa and looked out over the dark landscape. Carter's men will be hunting for us. We should move before dawn. Where will you go? Back to my people. Back to the life I should never have left. He turned to Jake. And you should go south, back to Tucson. Face Carter and end this. Otherwise, you will always be running. Jake's stomach tightened. Face him? He'll kill me. Perhaps. Or perhaps you have learned enough in these past days to survive. Either way, it is better than looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. They descended the mesa in darkness, moving carefully down the treacherous path. At the bottom, Tall Cedar pointed to the south. 3 days' walk to Tucson, stay off the main trails. Carter's men will be watching them. What about you? I go north. Our paths end here, Cowboy. Tall Cedar extended his hand and Jake shook it. May you find the courage to change. May you find peace, Jake replied. They parted ways without another word. Jake watched Tall Cedar disappear into the darkness, moving as silently as a shadow. Then he turned south and started walking. His shoulder ached, His feet were blistered, and he had no food or horse. But for the first time in years, he felt like he had a purpose. The journey back to Tucson was brutal. Jake survived on cactus fruit and the occasional rabbit he managed to catch. He avoided other travelers, staying in the wilderness and sleeping in whatever shelter he could find. Each day he thought about what he would do when he reached the town. Each night he questioned whether he had the courage to face Henry Carter. On the third day, he saw Tucson in the distance. The adobe buildings glowed in the afternoon sun, looking deceptively peaceful. Jake knew better. Somewhere in that town, Carter was waiting, probably wondering what had happened to his hired guns. Jake could just walk past, head for Mexico or California, start fresh somewhere Carter would never find him. But Tall Cedar's words echoed in his mind. Looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. Always running. Never free. Jake walked into Tucson as the sun began to set. He went straight to the trading post on the edge of town, his hand resting on his revolver. The store was open, but empty of customers. Henry Carter stood behind the counter, a fat man with greedy eyes and a permanent sneer. Carter's eyes widened when he saw Jake. You're supposed to be dead. Your men failed. Where's the Apache?
Where's the pouch?
Gone. Buried. You'll never find it. Carter's hand moved towards something under the counter, probably a shotgun. You cost me a lot of money, boy. A lot of money. You're going to cost me something, too, if you pull that gun, Jake said calmly. Your life. Carter froze, his hand halfway to the weapon. He studied Jake's face and saw something that made him reconsider. What do you want? I want you to spread the word. Tell everyone that the Apache artifacts are gone. Tell them Jake Miller is done with that life. Tell them if anyone comes after me, they'll end up like your hired guns. And why would I do that? Because if you don't, I'll come back here and burn this trading post to the ground with you inside it. I learned a few things from Tall Cedar. One of them is that some men only understand threats. Carter's face went red with anger, but he nodded slowly. Fine. You're not worth the trouble anyway. Jake backed toward the door, keeping his eyes on Carter. One more thing. If I hear you've sent anyone after the Apache or disturbed any more sacred sites, I'll come back, and I won't be alone. He left the trading post and walked through Tucson's streets. People stared at him, this dusty, wounded cowboy who looked like he'd been through hell. Jake didn't care. He went to the general store and bought supplies with the last of his money. Then he headed for the edge of town, toward the setting sun. A week later, Jake found work on a ranch in New Mexico. The owner, an old man named Frank, didn't ask questions about his past. He just put Jake to work mending fences and herding cattle. It was honest work, hard work, and Jake threw himself into it with determination he'd never felt before. Months passed. Jake learned that Tall Cedar had returned to his tribe and was now teaching the young warriors the old ways. He learned that Henry Carter's trading post had burned down under mysterious circumstances, and Carter had left Arizona for good. And he learned that he could sleep at night without nightmares, without constantly checking the shadows for enemies. One day, while riding the range, Jake saw a figure on a distant ridge. Even from far away, he recognized the silhouette. Tall Cedar sat on his horse, watching. Jake raised his hand in greeting. Tall Cedar did the same, then turned and rode away. They never met again. But Jake never forgot the lessons he'd learned on that journey. He never forgot the weight of carrying another man's bones, the price of bad choices, or the value of keeping your word. He became a foreman at the ranch, married a local woman named Kate, and raised 3 children who never knew their father had once been a thief. Years later, when Jake was old and gray, he would tell his grandchildren stories about the desert, about ancient traditions, and about a man named Tall Cedar who had shown him that redemption was possible. He would tell them that second chances were gifts, not rights, and that every choice mattered. And sometimes, on quiet nights, Jake would stand outside his home and look toward the northern mountains, where an old warrior's bones rested in peace, guarded by descendants who remembered. He would think about the path he'd walked, the man he'd been, and the man he'd become. And he would be grateful that Tall Cedar had given him the chance to change, even when he hadn't deserved it. The desert had taught him many lessons, but the most important one was this: a man's worth is not measured by his mistakes, but by what he does after making them.